The idea of an accurate or authentic recording of a musical performance without distortion is highly contested. The notion of high fidelity aesthetics and audiophile recordings, wherein the sonic representation of the musical performance with the tones, timbre, and color of the musicians' voices and instruments, the relative positions of the musicians to one another, and the image of the sound, whereby the listener is able to immediately grasp the dimensionality of the music in the space of the performance and the nature of the space itself. All these shape the aesthetics of a recording. The philosopher Joshua Glasgow points to the distinctions between hi-fi, lo-fi, and no-fi aesthetics. Lo-fi makes an accommodation for some accuracy, whereas no-fi takes the position that even a partially faithful, transparent recording is impossible, even if God were our own sound engineer, to use his words. The transparency thesis, as he points out, underscores this quest for accuracy without distortion. While in the commercial realm, competing technologies have for long promised more and more sophistication, and indeed, technological advances have brought great changes in fidelity. But above and beyond the sophistication and gadgets, there perhaps is a parallel path to accuracy or authenticity, terms that themselves are semiotically loaded and offer their own set of complications. Nevertheless, it's in the workflow, the aesthetics, and the artistic philosophical underpinnings of the work of the legendary recording engineer and producer Kavi Alexander that we perhaps find an approach of sidestepping these contentious debates and embracing, promoting a pathway that offers arguably an alternative notion, which I will call alt-fi, or alternative fidelity. Kavi has long argued that the space in the production chain, that is how music is recorded, with what tools, in what position, and which space have great bearing on the outcome. Certain kinds of musical traditions, particularly shrine and chamber music, and traditions linked to mystico-spiritual practices, are meant to be performed in spaces that imbue the performance with rich attributes, and thereby convey a deeper and inscrutable meaning. This sensory and artistic experience is inevitably lost when such recordings are done in a dead, soulless space of a sound studio. The Grammy Award-winning album, A Meeting by the River by Rai Kuda and Vishwamohan Bhatt, was a hugely successful production that Kavi did in 1992 under his label Water Lily Acoustics. Hailed by critics as masterfully recorded and a must-own, a thing of pure, unadulterated beauty, the album was a harbinger of several other specialty recordings that Kavi has brought to us. It is my great delight to talk once again to Kavi, who I first interviewed in April 2000 in Santa Barbara. Thanks, Kavi, so much for making the time to participate in this. I'm very, very pleased that to talk to you and to explore some of the ideas and your work that you've been doing over so long. My first question, which I'll jump right into, is you have been doing specialist recordings for a very long time. Before we come to the specialization, what prompted you to become a recording engineer and a music producer?
Well, it goes back to my mother as a child who played Carnatic violin. She had studied violin and she sang in the church. My parents were Christians, Methodist. My mother was a Methodist and my father was Catholic. He never went to church, but my mother was extremely devoted, and she sang. She had a beautiful voice. So this was the music I heard at home, sitting on a grass mat next to my mother while she played the violin. But the songs that were sung were Tamil hymns set in the Carnatic style, Saranam Pallavi, Anupallavi. And this music was all acoustic and incredibly moving. And so this is where my love of music begins. And symbolically, it's sacred music. And then, of course, through the radio, I discover Tamil film songs. Then I discovered Elvis Presley and Cliff Richard and the Shadows. And Radio Ceylon at that time was a very, very forward-looking station. And so they played Jim Reeves and Elvis Presley, and so this was now broadening my musical horizon. And then in the 60s, I discovered the USIS, United States Information Service in Colombo, which had a fabulous air-conditioned library with all the periodicals and newspapers you can dream of. But I was not interested in reading, the news. I went there with a specific reason, and that was the music library. They had a fabulous collection of American folk and traditional music. I would go and pick up, 10 LPs and listen all day. This was like Odetta Gordon and incredible amounts of gospel music. So this is where it all comes together. We did not have a stereo at home. We just had a wonderful German tube radio, shortwave. So this, all of this, I guess, permeated into my reign. And in the 60s, I'd gone to Paris because I wanted to explore what was going on. I couldn't live in Sri Lanka. I mean, the boarding school, I ran away from it. It's not for me, education of this style. So I ran away, and the counterculture was coming into gear, and I started to meet these young men who were coming from the West, looking for the mystical East. And of course, when we are talking about the 60s, we have to take into consideration certain plant substances.
Right.
And we were indulging in these plant substances and having discussions on sacred subjects. We were not just escapists. We were keen on using the heightened sensations of the plant-induced mind-altering experiences to come to understand, the essence of Buddhism or meditation or whatever it was, and reading books and trying to come to some kind of understanding, which was beyond our capacity. We were young, we were not mature, we were wild, insane, and passionately idealistic. Anyway, I went to Paris with the idea of discovering what it was that I would do with my life. Certainly not, higher education or any of that. It was definitely in the field of the arts. Which one? That was the question. I passionately loved music, and so in Paris, I was very lucky. My first job ever, I got a job as a member of the cast in the musical Hair, the French production. But in Paris, I had met an incredible man who I must say was my first mentor and a profound human being. He was only about 6 years older than me. And he had a fabulous stereo and an incredible record collection. Yeah, he mostly listened to classical music and jazz, so I turned him on to Carnatic music and to Tim Hardin and Bob Dylan and Odetta Gordon and Laura Nero, the people I was listening. So from him, I really understood the importance, not only of having a very good library, but also a record collection and a very good stereo. So I bought my first stereo in Paris. And I would buy all the Indian EMIs I could find, which you could get freely at Paris at that time. And I very quickly realized the Indian EMIs didn't sound very good. Mostly it was the vinyl. The recordings themselves very often were very good because they were using simple microphone techniques and Neumann tube mics and EMI made tube BMT recorders. The vinyl was terrible and the pressings were the problem. Sometimes the recordings were not good, but mostly they were excellent. And there was a big gulf between the recordings of Indian classical music made in the West. There were a lot of labels at that time, both in Europe and in America, that were recording Indian music, like Connoisseur Society and World Pacific and None Such, and Vanguard in the United States, and Harmonia Mundi, and Philips, and Chant du Monde in France. So I realized these recordings, first of all, were better sonically, and the vinyl was superior. So I collected these, and I would listen to them. And of course, I was listening to Chinese classical music, Persian classical music, Arab classical music. The same thing. I noticed that if they were produced in those countries that we're speaking of, it wasn't very good. So when the time came that I really had to decide what it was that I wanted to do with my life, I decided this is what I'm going to do. I want to start a record label to remedy this problem where the classical music of Asia was not being recorded properly. Whereas the Western classical music was very well recorded. Decca and EMI had an exemplary job, in the 50s, recording symphonic music not in studios, in acoustical venues that were very, very, very suitable for recording acoustic music. There was a lot of inspiration, and of course, my friend Philippe was full. He said, "Oh, this is it. You got to do this." And, and so finally, I did it.
I remember that when we first met 21 years ago in Santa Barbara, and
that's long ago. My God,
that long ago, and I interviewed you then. I remember you said that you started working as a record producer in Europe, producing jazz records.
In Sweden, yes. Because I'm so originally when I got this idea of starting a record label, I was living in Paris and I was married to my Swedish wife, who was named the finance minister, and all the money I made was given to her. Because if I had it, I'd spend it.
Right.
Buy records and books. We were trying to save money to go back and buy some land and live, on a farm. And so this was the quintessential 60s, idealistic dream. So we were trying to save money. And the original idea was only to record Indian classical music in the beginning. That was really, especially Carnatic music. And then at that time, the dream was to call it the Indian Shellac Company. It was sort of a tongue-in-cheek because the shellac 78s were made from the wings of some beetle that came from Kerala or something. I'd read somewhere the raw material was some beetle wings. So I thought it was great, and also, I had been quite taken by the Beatles, and we had everything set up. And this Swedish wife of mine of that period decided that she didn't want to live in France, and Paris was my place. It was in my blood. Anyway, she's your wife, and you have to listen to her. So we went to Sweden, and that was a mess. It didn't work out. We got divorced. So there I am in Sweden. Now there goes the record label, because once the finance minister quit, right, the country goes bankrupt. So I started going, what am I going to do now? And so I came up with the plan B, which was I'd work as an independent producer and make the recording, because that's what I want to do. I just want to make recording. That's all I want to do. So I went to this Swedish label in Stockholm called Amigo Music. And there were two brothers. And so I went and, talked to them and said, look, all these American jazz musicians will come here in the summer. And why don't you let me record them and you put them out? And so they said, fine. So my first recording that I made for them, which was released, of Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers with a young 19-year-old Wynton Marsalis.
Wow. What year was this, Kavi?
Yeah. This would have been 79 or something like that. And I had befriended many jazz musicians, Art Blakey, of course, and Thad Jones, who lived in Copenhagen, and he had his own big band called Eclipse, and I was talking about recording them. But then, I realized this is still not what I want, because, if you are this independent producer, once you make the recording and you hand over the master tape, you have no control over the sleeve notes and the art, which I wanted control of, and you can't expect that. So I thought, well, the only way is still the best way, start your own label. I decided I would go to the United States. Before I left Europe, so Indian Shellac Company, that name no longer had any meaning. Right. And my mother had died, so the next name I chose was Dawn of the White Lily, because my mother's name was Lily, and I wanted to pay homage to her because she was the one who instilled in me all the important things, right. Love of the sacred, love of music, love of the art, and also a love of a life not hampered by materialist quests.
So what year did you set up Water Lily Acoustics?
I left Sweden in 81. I arrived in the United States in 1981 toward the end. I lived in New York because I knew a lot of jazz musicians and they were very helpful. And then I moved to Chicago in 83. There was a jazz promoter who said he was interested in starting a jazz label, but that didn't work out. And then I ended up in California. And the reason I came to California was not really recording, but it was music related. As I told you, I started in Paris acquiring records and stereos. Came here with basically like the classic migrant, a little bag with my clothes and my tape recorder. So, but Harold invited me to come and help them. I had approached him and said, hey, do you want to put up some money to do a record label? See, that Art Blakey record, even before I came, had made some inroads among the audiophile community because of the way it was recorded. And so there was a bit of a buzz, about my name. There was a kid who worked at Beveridge, and he introduced me to a young man who had just come into some money, and he didn't know what he wanted to do with it. And so my friend said, hey, you want to get together with Kavi and start a record label. And anyway, he and we went up in this beaten up van to Northern California and called on the Lion of my heart, who was exceedingly gracious. And I said to him, Khan Saab, you made all these records, and I would like you to give me a chance to show you what I can do. And so he says to me, listen, I'm playing a concert in a week. Why don't you record the concert and we'll see. So I went and recorded this concert at a Hare Krishna center in Oakland or Berkeley. And the next day I went to his house, and I had all the equipment with me in the van, speakers and everything. I played him the tape, and he says, put it out. I said, what? Wow. He says, yeah, put it out. I said, concept, this is a concert recording. There are people coughing at it. He says, that's okay, you put it out. Now, I didn't want to argue with the Lion of my heart, So that was the first Water Lily record.
Wow. That's nice.
I didn't pay him a penny. I didn't pay him a penny. I didn't, there was no money changing hands, nothing. And this is, what I'm talking about. He helped me. He did this to put me on step one. And once you have recorded concept, then what Indian musician is not going to take you seriously? You've recorded the king.
One core thing that you've mentioned, you've spoken about, is a key philosophical underpinning of your recording techniques and your larger thought is about the purity, the approach towards the purity of certain kinds of music and why you chose to record them in a certain way. Could you speak about this philosophy?
Well, the philosophy is very simple. I mean, I am only interested in music that has deep spiritual roots, like Indian classical music. all the classical music in the Asia do, and in even Western classical music, its roots go back to, Palestrina and to the church music. That's where it comes from. It comes out of the sacred tradition. All music has roots in sacred traditions, and to me, this is what is important. This is all I'm interested in. I'm not interested in rock and roll or any of this money-making garbage. No. I want to record, 3 years ago, again, a miracle. I was invited to Mount Athos, Holy Mount Athos, to go there and to one of the monasteries and to show the monks how to record. And listen, I came back from there for the rest of my life. If I could record only Greek Orthodox chant, I'll do that. I would seriously. Wow. It's profound. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. All this crap that people listen to, what we call popular music, it's totally vacant. It's vacuous. It's not going to do anything. It's worse than junk food. People don't realize that. People think, eating junk food is bad. This is junk food of a much more insidious kind, because it's going inside of you, into your most innermost being, and it's going to rip you up. People don't realize that. And now with the headphones, they're immersed in this.
I'd like to specifically ask you about A Meeting by the River, that recording. Could you talk about that, how it came about, and how you recorded it?
It was simple. I had, aside from wanting to record the great maestros of the various Asian traditions and Western traditions, I was also inspired by Baba Alauddin Khan, the Lion of the Lion, this crossbreed thing. And I had already done a recording but people don't realize this. People think Meeting by the River, but no. Long before Meeting by the River, I recorded a West African Jali from Gambia, a kora player, with 3 gospel singers. Nobody knows this, Yeah. And so, Meeting by the River was nothing unique. It's just that what was unique was I was introduced to a wonderful luthier by the name of Rick Turner, who is the one who introduced me to Rai Kuda. And I was interested in Vishwa because of the slide, because he's a slide player. And he'd never heard anything like that. And Vishwa didn't want to make this record because he had no idea who Rai Kuda was. He said, this Kavi Alexander is nuts. He really didn't know who Rai was, and he thought it was a joke, and, it just happened, But that recording changed my life. It made me the most amount of money. I'll never see that kind of money again. And that funded all the other recordings that followed,
Could you also talk about your custom recording technique, that you've developed over time?
Well, the technique is nothing custom. The technique was patented in 1932 by Ellen Dover Blumlein, the father of stereo. That the microphone technique I used, that's nothing that I invented, no. But what was unique was the recording chain, because I wanted to have a vacuum tube chain, and I was lucky to befriend this wild, crazy Englishman by the name of Tim de Paravicini, and who was a wizard with vacuum tube, and he built me a pair of microphones and a mic preamp, and a tube Studer, modified tube Studer. So that was the magical recording chain. And the tape recorder was unique. It was 1-inch 2-track. Nobody had 1-inch 2-tracks at that time. And it was a very, very interesting chain, very short signal path, and with incredible dynamic range. And so there was the first 10, 12 recordings on Water Lily were recorded on various machines, starting with the $25,000 Nagra, T audio with Consub, and then I got a Ampex MR70, first quarter inch, then half inch, and then the 1 inch. So starting with Salamat Ali Khan and Dr. L. Subramaniam, on there were, even this Papa Banka Suso and Mama Pat, the Gospel, and Kora and Jali. It's called a Gathering of Elders. That was all done on the 1 inch. And that chain recorded practically the rest of the entire catalog until about 15 years ago, when I decided to go overseas and record symphonic music. And there was no way I could take this machine. This machine weighed like 200 pounds, and it was totally impractical. And so I had to embrace digital. And by that time, I had hated digital. By that time, digital had gotten very, very good. And Sony loaned me their DSD recorder. So my first symphonic recording was, again, a dream to record the St. Petersburg Philharmonic, the greatest Russian orchestra. Why did I want to record? Because in Paris, my friend Philippe had played me a recording of the St. Petersburg Philharmonic with Yevgeny Mervinsky, the great conductor of this orchestra. And this just blew my mind. And so that was a dream for many, many, many years, to go to Russia and record St. Petersburg Philharmonic. So finally, it happened.
Which year was this, Kavi?
Oh, I don't know, about 15, 20 years ago. I remain the first American, and I guess to this date, the only American company to record the St. Petersburg Philharmonic in Russia. Now, in the 50s, Mercury did go to Moscow and record. So they were the first American record company to record in Russia, but they recorded the Moscow Philharmonic with Byron Chanis, the great American pianist. It was a great recording. But I am the first American record company to record the St. Petersburg Philharmonic in Russia.
Wow. There's another very interesting aspect that you have spoken about before, and I've seen it written about as well. This is about the space that you, the church in Santa Barbara that you used to record at.
As I said, my kind of recordings cannot be done in a studio. You find a suitable acoustic venue. It can be a high school auditorium. It can be a beautiful large living room in a palatial home, depending on the music. So when I came to Santa Barbara, I had scouted out the various churches, and not all of them were willing to let you record late into the night. And the other thing was the logistical problem of traffic noise and all this. And so the early recordings were done in various churches until I found the St. Anthony's Seminary, which is the church you are referring to, where Meeting by the River was done, and so many other recordings. The beautiful thing about that, even though it was in the heart of Santa Barbara, it was set in a large bit of land, property, and so the traffic noise was not a problem. And this church had belonged to a seminary which was now defunct. So it only functioned on Sunday. There was a small group of Catholics who got together and had mass. So I could go there on a Sunday afternoon after, midday, and I could record there till the following Sunday, which I did.
Wow.
I recorded so many times that the priest even had a key made with my name on it. And it had a very special feeling. And
I want to ask you about that, because on a previous occasion when we spoke about 5 years ago, you used a phrase. You said that spaces, and you were talking about this space as well, they have a certain oral patina that has developed over time.
Yes. But remember, it's not only the air that's trapped in that space, but how that space has been utilized, which then charges the ethereal ambience in that church. So this, in that space, and this having been a church, had this energy pumped into it by all the people who had gone there. And, with faith, I remember I recorded a blind Vietnamese guitarist, and I was leading him into the church. He had no idea where he was going. I was holding his hand and leading him into the church. He knew he was going to the recording. He had no idea it was in the church. He took his first step onto the church. And as soon as he took his first step, he brought his two hands together in front of him. Now, I couldn't speak to him because even though he was quite old, he didn't speak French, which I do, and I could have spoken to him, but he didn't. So there was a translator, Vietnamese. I asked him, why did he do that? And the answer was, he had felt that he was entering a sacred space. So there's your answer. How did he know? He hadn't even entered the building. He put his foot on the first step.
That's really fascinating.
So, yeah. So, there are spaces like this, charged. I mean, this church in Mount Athos, we are talking serious magic. Because this place has been there for centuries. It's got all this art. It's all religious art from, 1st century AD. And these monks are chanting every day. That's all that goes on there.
If I were to ask you to describe, what is it that you think you're capturing in these recordings? How would you respond to that?
We are capturing the magic being conjured by the musician. That's what we're doing. We're trying to capture the magic that's being conjured right there in front of you. Look, when Kansa plays a rag, that rag, the way he's going to play, didn't exist, does not exist. It comes into birth. This is a midwifery. Audio midwifery. You're helping to deliver this glorious entity that's going to come into the world.
Right.
And that's what it's all about. It's nothing to do with the merchants and the money changers who are sitting at the steps, who are defiling the sacred space. But, this is what the whole thing is, So here's this little island surrounded by this ocean of commercial activity, and it's all fake.
You have also done a major recording of a major American Philharmonic Orchestra with the Bloom Lamp technique with just two microphones.
Yes, Philadelphia.
Could you talk about
Yes,
that?
Philadelphia, that's again symbolic because, at the time the birth of stereo was taking place, it was simultaneously happening on both sides of the Atlantic. So Alan Blumlein, the father of stereo, was working for EMI, and he was trying to develop sound for film, and this Blumlein mic technique that I use came out of a lot of that research. At the same time, at Bell Labs, they were the American. Bell Labs was, the leading technological, think tank in the world. Brilliant minds. And they were coming up with their own scheme, and they recorded this Philadelphia orchestra because they were in New Jersey, so it was next door. And at that time, Philadelphia was led by this very colorful conductor called Leopold Stokowski, and they made these historic recordings. So the first stereo recordings in the United States were made by the Philadelphia Orchestra. And then, the multi-mic and, 35 microphones and all these mixers and all this stuff came. And so finally I go back after all those years and record this orchestra that had created the first stereo recording with two microphones. And it took a lot of doing. People had to be convinced who didn't want to be convinced. You can hear this, buy a recording of a major symphony, recorded, say, in the late 80s, and you go back and buy the early Decca or Mercury or EMI recording done in the 50s, 60s, there's a world of a difference. You can hear right away. There's a cohesiveness, that multi-miking. Now, again, when I say multi-miking, there are engineers who use what I call minimalist multi-miking. They use maybe 5, maybe 6, but 35. No, that's not in my book. But there are people who believe that that's how it has to be done. There are people who believe that's how you have to record Indian music. You put, as many mics as you can.
As I think about your back catalog, as I think about the recordings that you have created over all these years, I start to consider them as as a form of a sonic legacy, beyond just the material of sound recordings. How do you assess what you've done in terms of these recordings when you look back?
Oh, look, I understand it's an important catalog, but there are hundreds of other superior recordings and great performances of great artists. I'm just a little drop in the ocean. I do see that there is a legacy there, no question about it, but I cannot evaluate it and give it some kind of Michelin star. That's not my job. My job is to record as I said, be the midwife and bring into birth a wonderful child. A beautiful rag or a beautiful melody, a beautiful song, and there's so much incredible art, great artists all over the world. I would love to go to Uzbekistan, and record there.
Is there any particular recording of yours that you've made that holds some kind of special meaning to you?
They all have, every session is special. You realize that, when Vishwa and Rai met, they had no idea who they were. They didn't know their name, nothing. So you're watching this unfolding, of these men from different cultures, who really don't know each other. They're being taken into a Catholic church. And they end up sitting on a Persian rug in front of a Christian altar. And there's this long-haired shaman running around making chai and, telling jokes. And there's this intimidating microphone stand, kind of like a crude version of Eiffel Tower. And this is not how they make records. These guys are, this is not how they're used to making records. They're going into a studio and there's a glass panel and a clock. And I'm surprised that I got what I got so far, because sometimes, you've done 2 rags and the man is wasted.
Well, we're all the richer for the wonderful recordings that you've created, Kavi. It's been an absolute delight to talk to you and hear your thoughts and your reminiscences and your stories and anecdotes. Many thanks for doing this. I really appreciate you giving the time.
This concludes the Sonic Legacies series of talks on the realm of sound in our past and present. Many thanks to Face Foundation and DHI Art for asking me to curate it and for hosting it. Sound is a greatly mysterious thing. So is our listening and the choices we make in doing so. Beyond this is what we hear within our own minds, another grand space of mystery. I hope to have provoked some curiosity through these talks, and I urge viewers to further consider the realm of sound with more attention, more thought, and closer listening. Should you like to reach out to me with questions, I'm on social media, and you may also email me. I am Gautam Pemaraju, and this has been Sonic Legacies. Thank you very much.